Big round of applause for yourselves out there. This is prime time, 2:50 p.m. CEST, right here today at Paris Blockchain Week Summit. Big round of applause for all the awesome team backstage. You'll never get thanked enough for all the hard work that they do, Arnaud and the team. And Luke Kerner, he was on the stage just earlier to introduce us, the MC. Way overdue. We'll never get enough praise for what he does. Big round of applause for Luke Kerner. I think about around 6 months ago, I'm going to mark him a little bit. Super connector with Crypto Mondays, and then he is the CEO of a SPAC. I think it's the first one, or first few, let's just call it that, of his crypto company. Just check that out. They're fund of funds. Dig in, go meet him. He's really, really friendly. My name is Jordan French, executive editor at Grit Daily, publisher also of BlockTelegraph news outlets. So fittingly, we're going to start with some news that's not yet announced. I was really excited to see this, but Nexo's here with us. Antoni Trenchev, I think you have something physical with you too. Antoni, what do you want to share with this audience?
A little unpaid for advertising. We just announced the world's first card with partnership with MasterCard, and it's awesome because there are a lot of crypto cards that allow you to spend your crypto, but this is the first one that when you swipe it, you actually take out a loan, which is great for us crypto natives. We keep on holding our crypto. And to the overarching theme of today's discussion, this is ultimately what will bring adoption to the space. For the non-crypto natives, they would want to have the same conveniences, the same tools that are used to, so that they don't have to adapt to new realities, but come and enjoy the same things they have in the traditional world of finance.
It is certainly germane, to borrow a French word, for this topic on digital assets specifically. But just to repeat it back to you so people know the import of that, there are a lot of cards out there. People could spend crypto, but not necessarily borrow against it. This is the first time that that's possible. Okay, we got that. Awesome. And so we have more news. This is what news outlets do. Stephen Richardson is with us with Fireblocks. And I think it's going to be a great way to segue into an operability conversation. But you just made an acquisition, Stephen.
Yep. So we just acquired First Digital. They're a payments infrastructure company. For us, it's really important to think about where stablecoins and the utilization of digital assets will go. And so really building infrastructure is critical to what we do. And so the acquisition of First will really allow us to make a move in the payment space.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, we'll talk about interoperability between centralized systems and decentralized, how they'll work together, which takes me to Cyrus with SwissBorg. He's right next to me. And at Grit Daily, big round of applause for Cyrus for being here. And we had to step in. Woo! Because we're not done. We're not done with our news. News is actually really cool. And so I was saying, just mid-sentence, Grit Daily, we really respect where we are. And we are here in Paris. We're in France. We're not in the U.S. U.S.-centric a lot of us get. I'm at fault for it all the time, Cyrus, but something really big happened here, and specifically in France for SwissBorg.
Yes, exactly. Who believes regulation is important? Raise your hand.
Important, yes.
It's important, right? So I'm super glad to announce that we're one of the first crypto exchange that is actually regulated here in France. Yes, you heard me right. We got the PISAN license, so that's extremely important for us. It's great for mass adoption, and woo!
Yeah, congrats. Congrats on that, because I think that's the underlying foundation of this whole conversation. Is ultimately just to unpack this. If you don't know why you're here, this talk is on 2030, specifically 2030, and digital assets in 2030, not 2029 or 2031. We'll be in that straitjacket. But ultimately, it comes down to the mass adoption question, right? And getting beyond the, as you said earlier, Cyrus, before, getting beyond the 2% who own crypto. Before we get there, I do want to be fair to Boaz Avital. Any big fans of Boaz Avital out there? Give him a big round of applause for joining us from Anchorage Digital, all the way from San Francisco. It's a hell of a flight, Boaz. And you do have some fans out there. I'm going to be fair. I want to be fair to you because I have to ask naturally, and I might know the answer. Do you have any news to share? Because we're at the hat trick at the moment.
I just want to welcome you to the world of well-regulated digital asset companies. Anchorage is the first and only federally chartered bank in the U.S. that serves digital assets, and It's going to be critically important for getting those large institutions that will get us to that mass adoption.
Awesome, and that certainly taps on the regulatory component. For those who are uninitiated on me, former Office of Enforcement attorney at one of the U.S. regulators, so super familiar with what we're doing at the SEC. And what will come up is an often obscured office, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency in the U.S., and we'll draw some parallels, some of the EU counterparts with Cyrus. But I'm going to go right back to you on this, Cyrus, to unpack that. Coming from the foundation, we'll go to the interoperability conversation in just a bit. But it's so important, and just to lay some foundation, it's worth challenging. Why is mass adoption so important? It seems like everyone's doing well here. Why should we care?
I mean, it's always that, right? Like, who knows where we're sitting? Does anyone know where we're sitting? Anyone? What is this place? Yeah, over there. What is it? Stock exchange. Does someone know when this was built? 300 years ago. 300 years ago, wealth management was for what? 20 people? Maybe 30? 300 years later, is it for how many people? 5, 6, 7, 8%? Right? How do you make sure that blockchain is an underlying technology that could serve people to invest, use as well to play with it, earn with it, but as well to create a new society where you could essentially govern it? I think so. This is really why we're here today. A lot of people don't believe that the blockchain technology is something that could create a system where we could collaborate all together to make a better and a more fair place. And this is exactly what many of us are doing here on the panel here, is providing this infrastructure, these applications to bring mass adoption to the world of crypto. Yeah.
Certainly. Thanks for that, Cyrus. And Boaz, I'm going to go to you and then Stephen on this topic. So one thing, especially at the pedestrian level, but even in a lot of the echelons of the crypto native community, not all cryptos created equal. There's more than just the retail trade.
Of course. The world of digital assets, the way that you guys interact with most of your assets today is through other financial institutions. And I don't think most of you expect the majority of people to be creating a wallet, interacting on chain. What we need is these institutions who know how to reach millions and millions of people in various different ways to create stability and mainstream adoption in crypto. One of the things that Anchorage does is creates regulatory clarity, technical safety and security, and a familiar interface for other financial institutions, big banks, corporations, hedge funds, to allow them to interact with crypto. The thing that gives us is a mainstreaming of these assets that does not take away from their core characteristics, permissionlessness, the ability to have free and open innovation on these blockchains. These two things together are what is actually going to realize the potential of these digital assets. It's going to allow people to use crypto in their day-to-day lives no matter where they are in the world.
And just to pull on that thread a little bit more, both you and Cyrus mentioned, or discussed rather, the licenses that you very recently and somewhat recently got. But to invert that, it seems that there are a lot out there that don't have that French license, that don't have that license from the U.S. Office of the Comptroller of Currency, the obscure OCC, which certainly not obscure after this with this size of the audience. Hearing that, Boaz, why is that? Why is there sort of the other side of the ledger is so absent?
Innovation is happening really, really quickly. And innovation, one of the great things about the things that we do is innovation can get ahead of regulation and really try to make new and cool things happen. But eventually, as it reaches the masses, we want to do the things that regulation is designed for, which is protect people. Make sure that we are able to serve clients well, make sure that we are doing the right things by everybody that's involved, and hopefully do that in a way that doesn't stifle new innovation. That's one of the things that we want to do, is set the precedent of how we do this in the right way so that future institutions can come in and interact and build on top of crypto in the way that we know that we need to in order to get beyond speculative assets into real forms of interaction and communication and coordination across the world.
Certainly, you mentioned real forms. I know you have a point, Stephen. I want to go right and dive in on this, though, on the something that we all use. And one example was Stripe that we talked about earlier. Stripe. There are other payment processors out there, and they're all centralized. We just get a quick raise of hands. Who's swiped their credit card, the last 24 hours? Any type of credit card? Yeah, just literally put your hands up. Don't be shy. Yeah, it's a good number. Okay, we're getting. They're timid, but over here, they're timid. They're either that or they're really listening, Stephen. They're about to listen to what you're about to say. And I do want to go to the point that you're going to make, but can you unpack that for us? So this conversation broadly is on that infrastructure bit. It's not so simple. It's just connecting things, like plugging them in.
Right. So, I mean, I think to the point that we have, right, we're an infrastructure provider. I mean, we're not a regulated financial institution. We think there are people that do that really well. Our job is to think about where do we think the market is going and what's the technology evolution that needs to be there. So from a payments perspective, if you look at the way the world is working, is most of you probably own a wallet. You either own a Zengo, a Ledger, some device, or you use Fireblocks if you're lucky, or another institution, right? At the end of the day, those things are distributed, decentralized, and operate on their own, right? In the case of Visa, MasterCard, Stripe, et cetera, right? They built centralized systems that, in essence, have scalability due to their centralization. So the question that we really think about as you think about the movement towards stablecoins and more adoption of those and commercial bank money being in stablecoins is how do you connect those two ecosystems to build a scalable system, right? And that's where we looked at the acquisition of First, and that's where we think about things from a infrastructure perspective. Now, that being said, there are institutions, banks, other regulated institutions that then need to take the technology that we develop and apply the proper frameworks to then have it get to the level of mass adoption that's needed to be safe for consumers to be able to use. And we have to think about where the innovation is going in the market and how fast that's occurring to make sure that we're ahead of the curve, such that when these institutions are ready to then adopt these technologies, they're able to do so at scale. So that's where we play, and infrastructure providers like ourselves and others are critical in making sure that when the time is right and when the use cases then make themselves available, they're able to be adopted at mass.
Yeah, certainly, speaking at mass, I think one of the underlying themes here is that 2030, it's even closer now than when we started this panel. You at Fireblocks and you with Anchorage Digital are much more infrastructure, maybe back end, I could call them, or purely B2B plays. One theme there, though, is that you could reach Cyrus's mass adoption without necessarily wholesale everyone literally knowing that they're necessarily blockchain enabled. And to bring Nexo and Antoni back into this conversation, first, thanks for showing us the card if you did earlier. You did, right? You did, yeah. So it's
shameless self-promotion.
Well, it's shameless self-promotion for MasterCard. They're shockingly looking very forward-looking, at least insofar as their propensity to use the blockchain. Right. So speaking of usage of blockchain, I see Crypto.com here. It's a big. They're a sponsor. Cyrus on his app is 650,000 on a what I would call like a retail level of people who use his app. But specifically, one thing that they're doing is something that at least a decent contingent in this audience evangelize, and it's hodling. But I'm wondering, Antoni, if hodling is actually not necessarily the right thing to do in all cases, and it's to use the blockchain and use cryptocurrency to do things. Your take?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. You can hold all your cryptocurrencies and do a bunch of stuff with them. Historically, holding your crypto for prolonged periods has fared incredibly well, just from alpha generation and returns. We all know Bitcoin is this asymmetric asset that has delivered gargantuan returns. So, going forward, hopefully that will continue to be the case. And, that's just why we work so hard on developing auxiliary tools and services around this philosophy that we have, hodling within our bubble that we live. And quite frankly, we are living in a bubble a little bit. A lot of people are not in on this yet, but, this brings back to, the ability to interact with your assets, whether it's borrow, whether it's earn, all those services that allow you to even hold for prolonged periods. Now, this doesn't solve a lot of the problems that blockchain set out to solve. The decentralization versus centralization problems. They're ever more relevant now that the metaverse is upon us. To me, it's terribly important, and probably in 2030 will be even more so. How the metaverse is built out. Is it going to be a corporation that is going to control it, whether it's Meta, whether it's Google, whoever, or will the guys from the bubble prevail and build out these decentralized platforms and worlds in which the virtues of blockchain technology will be exemplified and have some real life applications? Because right now, it's great to hold Bitcoin, you can transfer value, it's great in hash inflation, but your day to day, you're unlikely to be doing in crypto still. And I think this is also one of the larger themes that is going to be important, the mean of exchange. And last but not least, we got to start thinking of crypto as our accounting unit. I'm starting to thinking of spending Bitcoin rather than dollars, and it's a very different mind shift in me personally. A little bit all over the place, but I see at least two guys wanting to jump in. So
and certainly on the note, it's you reference the US dollar, so I'll pick on it. And it is looking awfully inflationary lately. Right after this, I'm going to go. Well, first I'm going to go to Cyrus, and then Steven,
if I could just, Sean, what Antoni is saying. I mean, everyone here has Bitcoin, right? Raise your hand. The people who don't have Bitcoin, there's no purpose standing here, guys. So go buy some Bitcoin on SwissBorg, please, okay? Second thing, the people raise their hands. Whoever has paid anything in Bitcoin, raise your hand.
And who hasn't regretted it?
And that's where the dangerous part is. So, for example, my dad is based in Iran. Every month I send Bitcoin, Ethereum, and now USDC because it's slightly easier, okay? I pay for his dental surgery 3 weeks ago in Bitcoin. And that's what you have to be doing, is how to use essentially this blockchain technology. If it's just for hodling, that's only the first step. You have to make the yodeling. So SwissBorg, we're a lot of people are Swiss, so we say that yielding is great, right? Yeah, yielding is great, especially if it's used on Aave, on Compound, if it's used on Anchorage, it's on different other DeFi products where you could use the technology behind it. If you're just putting it on your ledger, it's a great first step, but you have to really make sure that you're yielding. Obviously, to yield is not that easy, right? All the DeFi protocols today, there's some great ones, there's some shady ones, and there's some that will, explode eventually. And that's where you need to look at who are the right players that are bringing mass adoption. And today, who's over 70 years old in the room, or 60 years old in the room? Anyone over 60?
I don't know if I'll have many volunteers for that.
There you go. Congratulations, ma'am. So you're over 60. I think so. This is what we're doing really well on our platform is that every month we have 100 users that are over 80 years old that are depositing their fiats, that are exchanging this in crypto, and they're then yodeling. And this is exactly what we have to be thinking is always how to create an app that could bring security. With that, you have multiple different functions, such as user experience. You need, obviously, to be regulated. You need to have a core message to what you're doing. But build the right apps that could bring the next, 8 billion people to get into crypto. And I think so, all of us here, this is exactly what we're working really hard on different of these business sides, yeah.
And Steven, to develop that further?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point was 2017, 2018, 2016, 2017, 2018. There weren't many use cases for you leveraging your digital assets, right? Like Bitcoin, and there weren't a ton of those. The idea and the introduction of stablecoins and what it can do for DVP settlement, what it can do for payments, what we're seeing around tokenization of securities, carbon credits, other green assets, gives more and more use cases for folks to actually use assets. And we're seeing a diversification of these assets across different blockchains, Stellar, Hedera, Ethereum, et cetera, right? So there's more of a use case basis for actually leveraging your digital assets and getting invested and creating alternative portfolios that I think didn't exist at a point in time. And so I think that becomes the critical basis for mass adoption in my mind. So for an example, we just worked with ANZ Bank in Australia for them to release their Aussie dollar stablecoin. And we see that as a basis for which the likes and the utilization of digital assets becomes more commonplace for a lot of retail consumers. We'll see that across that type of adoption, we think across multiple banks in the region, and we're seeing that type of adoption being looked at within Europe and the US. That basis of commonality, association with something people are familiar with, and easy infrastructure to be able to use that, then brings more adoption and allows people to get involved in more complex products and services. So I think we're making this road, like these gradual steps towards 2030 when we'll see more people utilizing these, but it's the job of people in this room to create applications and products that people can associate with common services that they use today, right? And then implement that and then manage those at scale, right? And so that's where I think the big difference is from 2016, 2017, where it's quite complicated to actually get involved in this space at all.
And certainly, Stephen, some banks are really big, but we can go bigger. Earlier this year, news came out of El Salvador, and more recently, now Honduras, going back to Antoni's point about wholesale adoption, countrywide for a particular use. We've been monitoring that really closely. A lot of news organizations have been. What's been going on in El Salvador, which has been the use of Bitcoin specifically for practically everyday purchases. So far, what we've seen is it looks like a lot of people use Bitcoin ATMs, or that's interoperable now with their bank. And it's been clunky, but so far, what looks like somewhat successful, even though it's drawn the ire of the World Bank and some of the other sort of international institutions that look certainly at fiat and rate them. Antoni, on that topic, with 2030, not even 8 years away, that in mind at the country level?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's worth taking a step back and, just acknowledging how much the space has evolved and in what a dramatic direction. Early on it was like, oh, it's just a couple of cyberpunks and nerds using it, and then it was just these terrible speculators and companies that are looking for fundraising via ICOs, and now we're stuck with a narrative. Oh, but it's only small countries that have adopted Bitcoin, and it just speaks volumes about the size and the growth of it. And I'm absolutely certain that even earlier than 2030, we will have other countries in Latin America adopt Bitcoin as a standard, even companies such as Terra, shout out to Doc Kwon for what he is doing, purchasing Bitcoin large scale and, pitching the Bitcoin standard. So there's no doubt that entire countries will adopt it, with Tesla and MicroStrategy. Pandora box is open for S&P 500 companies to follow suit, and ultimately I think it will be demanded by the shareholders, by the citizens, by the clients, that everybody does it because it has yielded such incredible results in the past.
Boaz.
I think it's great. The two things you guys brought up are two sides of the same coin. The crypto ecosystem is creating options for the entire world to take control of their monetary future and the future of their value. So whether a country is adopting Bitcoin because the Bitcoin standard is better for them, or countries are moving towards CBDCs because just the fact of the ability to transmit assets and transmit value, intraday, more often, borderlessly, in a way that is much more seamless and much more efficient. It's very nerdy to say, in and of itself, it's going to make huge improvements to the way that we all work in the world. All of these technologies stand alone. We bundle them all together into this one idea of crypto. But there's a lot of individual innovations that we can take out of it and apply to our day-to-day lives and the way institutions want to both participate in the transfer of value, which we see very often, or in interacting on-chain with protocols via staking and governance and DeFi, whether it's lending and financial services. Institutions have to be able to do all of these things in order to be successful, and that's one of the things that we want to be able to provide.
Cyrus.
A lot has been said. It's always hard to come after. But at the end, why was Bitcoin created? Bitcoin was created because there was a massive frustration where banks were not behaving in the right way. Bitcoin was created because there was countries that didn't empower their citizens and started to control them in certain different ways. And we see this on and on and on, right? Power, money, greed, always the same thing. And what I see the underlying technology, but that beautiful philosophy of decentralization, is how we together could create a different future, right? The institutions, the country will probably always have a play. But the more interesting part is how these different DOs, how these different communities, how we together could start forming anything, right? Any different project. You're seeing NFT projects are, coming like mushrooms all the time. Some of them don't make sense, but then eventually they make sense, right? Because you start creating a community. Always the foundation of something is to have a community, then starting to create a great mission with that, make sure there's governance system that you guys put in place, and make sure that you build the right products and the right applications for that. So for me, it's how these DOs and how these communities could get at another level. You see recently, what's the one for investing? It's the DO, BitDO, right? These guys are now reinventing, for example, VC, right? How maybe we together could all put in, chip in, few thousand to few millions, and maybe each token represents a share to vote for the next project, and how you could start incubating the best projects of tomorrow. This is where I'm very, very interested, is how, as a decentralized autonomous organization, we could reshape eventually companies, businesses, but more importantly, countries, yeah.
Yeah, certainly, and since you referred to best products, and we got this question emailed in right before the panel, to Grid Daily. Inquiring minds want to know. I'll go to you on this, Antoni, and then to you, Stephen, on the same. Is the proliferation of different cryptocurrencies, and to that extent, the blockchains and sidechains, is that an obstacle to reaching mass adoption, as Cyrus has laid that foundation for 2030? Or is that a tailwind to assist that, Antoni?
It's an opportunity in disguise. I would phrase it that way. The beauty of crypto is that it's actually one of the very few free markets. With equities and traditional finance, you have these regulators, you have this buyer of last resort. The bigger players don't get to fail as they should because they're too big to fail, etc. And then the only free market is crypto. So you can have, I don't know, when we started out in 2017, it was like 700-800 coins. Now it's 16,000 or something. It's a 20x growth. And I think there's beauty in that. You can start out, you can compete, you can present your case, and the market evaluates it. If you develop a good product, great, so be it. And if not, then you fail. I think there's beauty in allowing entrepreneurs to fail as well, which in traditional finance somehow doesn't appear to be the case anymore, at least for the big guys. And then, at the end of the day, you have to have the companies and the infrastructure that allow you to have this a beautiful, easy-to-use interface that simply makes it all work. Because we are all about decentralization and taking matters into our own hands. But how many of you are using a Linux platform on their laptop? I see 2, 3, maybe 7 hands. Okay, and how many are on the Mac laptop ecosystem? Well, vast majority. And what does that tell you? It tells you that people want to have something that simply makes it for them work. So it's great if you have all these different asset classes, but then you have to have something overarching that simplifies the use of it all.
Make a good point on what amounts to UI, UX. Stephen?
Yeah, look, I think for us as an infrastructure provider, we think about that all the time, right? So I think the idea that people...
And you do a great job, by the way.
Thank you. I think the fact that you can choose, we have banks and institutions and new funds being able to choose what blockchains they want to launch different projects on, what they want to tokenize with. That's a positive thing in the space. I think the job is to basically give people common infrastructure to then be able to hold those. I think there's a lot of work still to do, and maybe Boaz will talk about this further in terms of cross-chain oracles and all these different pieces to really make it more adaptable and easier to kind of look at information seamlessly. But I think that's where the opportunity is.
I totally agree. It's super important for infrastructure providers to be agnostic, to try to provide what it is that people are looking for. The idea of where we are technically with cross-chain, with NFTs, it's still super early days. But the thing that the reason why I like this question of 2030, 5, 10 years in the future, the the thing that if we were here, if you guys were here during the growth of the internet from the late 90s and you saw the proliferation of experimentation and the ways in which people tried to change the way the world interacts with each other, the thing that you can't count out is this permissionless innovation, this ability for people to solve problems independently around the world. So we don't know in a lot of ways what things are going to look like in 2030 because somebody today is, an idea is in their mind that they're going to implement in the next few years that we never even thought of.
Right, and I'm not going to let you off the hook on that though, Boaz, because I do hear this a lot, right, about, we don't know. So as, a business practitioner, and that's a lot of what this audience is the industry inside. How can they prepare? Let's take the assumption that you're right, that we don't know. What are the things that you can do to keep your door open as long as possible so that you're there at the 2030 mark?
You keep your network open, so you see what the smartest people are doing, what the people who are on the cutting edge of exploring in these industries are doing. And I think one of the things that crypto taught everybody is to remember to stay curious. If you see a lot of people really, really excited, smart people about something you don't understand, do not dismiss it. Explore it. Try to figure out what is interesting, what is the kernel of something that is meaningful about this thing, and how might it change.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, Boaz. You got it straight. I mean, if you look from the crypto assets from, let's say, 2015 to 2022, the top 10s have always changed, right? You maybe have, Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP that were there mainly for the last, 7 years, but all the others has been changing and will completely change. That top 10, that top 20 will always change. And what I like to look at the crypto side. Prior to crypto, I was working a decade in the more boring stuff of hedge funds and things like that. But I had this way to break down asset classes. And what I see in crypto, the first is the payment tokens, right? Payment tokens such as Bitcoin, Litecoin. Litecoin was the biggest thing back, XRP too. Is that Litecoin and XRP is going to be the biggest tomorrow? To be honest, I have quite big dots. Is Shiba going to be the next one or Dodge? Potentially, right? That could be like new interesting ones. Then you have to look at the second. The second is infrastructure layers, right? So you had Bitcoin, then you had Ethereum that came in, then there's Solana that's come in, but there's going to be new ones. And it's always going to be like that because people in crypto like to flip, like to look at new stuff. And there's more important, there's new, always R&D that's happening. Some scale them faster, some just have, better business case, as some have just more people that chill it, whatever reasons, we're always going to see a lot of different infrastructure that's going to come, and potentially maybe one day, one's going to take it all, but, I'll be very interested to see like how Cosmos is going to play this interoperability between chains, which might be a very interesting one. And then you have utility tokens, right? SwissBorg token, Nexo token. There's a lot of different tokens that have a different usage where you get membership, you get superpowers, you get governance rights. And those, each time there's a new project, well, there's a new utility token, which makes sense, right? We just have a lot of different use cases based on the project. But make sure when you look at the utility tokens, is there a real usage? If there's governance, yes. How many people are voting on chain, right? That's a really good way to see if these things are actually being used or not. The fourth for me is security tokens. So far, unfortunately, there's not have been so many great things besides stable coins. It is what it is because none of these different exchanges are not yet regulated and don't have sufficient capacity to offer these security tokens, but everyone, I think so. I mean, maybe let's ask, who believes in security tokens? Raise your hand. Not many people. Okay, that's funny. And
it almost sounds like religion, Cyrus, when you say, believe in. It's worth unpacking that word. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I think so. Is there a future for security tokens? I believe that, today having a share and like who owns shares here in the room? Raise your hand. Right? You actually don't own anything. You just have a depository within a bank that maybe has another bank that's holding your share. The day you want to move from your, robo-advisor or from your bank account, you can't move your shares. So that doesn't belong to you. So that's why we have blockchains and have ledgers and ownership of your data. So this is why I think so it's more importantly, and then obviously if tomorrow you want to buy shares, like for example, in different emerging markets, it's very complicated, like to get into it. So that's why I think so blockchain will be a great technology player that could bring in the security tokens. And the last fifth asset class for me is NFTs, right? And NFTs, you know, such as security tokens, or probably even more, we already have billions of these NFTs, right? And why do we have so many? Is just because probably the most biggest driver of old industry going forward, listen to this carefully, is video games, guys. This industry just booming on a daily basis, on a yearly basis, and play and earn is going to be, you know, probably the biggest industry that will bring mass adoption. We saw it with the early stage was Axie Infinity. They had over 30 million users. No other blockchain has that amount of users. And that's a very basic game. It's play to earn, you know what it is. But when we're getting into the real esporting, the real best games like that are just being shipped right now, this is when we're going to see this entire ecosystem grow and everyone's going to be using blockchain, you know, not even realizing they're on it.
Riveting. Finally, I spotted the timer. I'm going to give you the last word in the interest of time as courtesy of this audience. Stephen.
Last word, okay. No, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the points that were raised here were correct, right? And so I think it's the people in the room here that are thinking through what those implications are, right? And building new services and technology applications for it, right? And that will be the basis for which we'll see kind of 2030 and more adoption to happen. So congratulations to people in the room that have developed what they've developed so far, and we're looking forward to see what's next.
And metaphorically, it's all playing the game, Cyrus, in the room. That's all the time that we have. I'm Jordan French, Executive Editor at Grit Daily. Big round of applause.
Thank you very much.